So here's 10 ways to improve your fastball vert without using sticky substances. I'm Ben Brewster, co-founder of Tread Athletics. Let's dive into these tips. So first, a disclaimer. So this is assuming that you have a good reason to want to chase increased fastball vert. Not every pitcher should be chasing increased fastball vert, specifically sinker ball pitchers or potentially lower slot pitchers, where you just have to be aware, is this a profile that I should be trying to chase? I'm going to assume for the sake of this video that the answer is yes, and that you have a good reason for chasing increased fastball vert. The first tip is to widen out your finger width. So for certain guys, depending on if they get a little bit middle finger dominant and they end up supinating, actually widening out the fingers can help improve that spin efficiency. And so you'll see with most of these tips, it goes back to one of two things. We're finding a way to increase the fastball's axis, so getting the fingers more on top of the ball, or finding a way to improve that pitch's spin efficiency, so getting the fingers more behind the ball. Really, all of these tips are finding ways to do one of those two things for the most part. The second tip would be to actually, ironically, bring the fingers closer together. So for certain pitchers, they're actually a little bit too wide with that four-seam fastball grip. And actually bringing the fingers a little bit closer together for certain pitchers will not only improve fastball vert by improving spin efficiency, but also get them a tick or two on their fastball velocity as well. So this comes back to, you look at both of those different tips, you're gonna have to experiment with a little bit wider grip, a little bit narrower grip, and see where you get that best carry, best velocity, best feel, best command. And that is gonna be a sweet spot depending on the individual pitcher. And also bringing us into tip number 3, which is the actual grip tension, or how hard you're gripping the ball. So for this third tip, I've had pitchers where all we do is go from holding it like an egg to having a little bit of tension on those fingertips, where you can really leverage that seam. And that alone for them was enough to increase their spin rate just a little bit and get 1 or 2 extra inches of induced vertical break. Tip number 4 would be to tuck the thumb. So this is going to be very individual based. For me personally, I never really felt comfortable tucking the thumb, but there are quite a few pitchers, again, Jacob deGrom comes to mind, where having a little bit of thumb tuck can not only help with the actual velocity on the pitch, but for certain pitchers, the way that you're able to interact with your fingertips coming off the ball, that ball is not going to be as impacted by the thumb as it comes off the fingertips. So actually tucking the thumb can lead to an increase in fastball vert by having a little bit cleaner release off the fingertips for certain pitchers. Again, I've also seen pitchers have an increase in velocity as well when they tuck their thumb. So again, there's not a guarantee with any of these. The point is trial and error, intelligent tinkering, and having a way to actually measure if what you're doing is working. This is where having measurement tools like a TrackMan becomes so valuable. The next way that you can actually influence fastball vert has to do with how you actually change your arm slot. So you can raise your arm slot, but the way that I would encourage you to do it is not the way that most people think about it. So when you think about your arm slot, it's not simply climbing your arm here and raising the arm above the plane of the shoulders. So most players will potentially fall into some of these compensations when they're trying to chase that higher tilt, fingers on top of the ball, and they'll end up actually climbing the elbow, ending up in this kind of dart throwing, pushing path. Again, that is one way to artificially cheat that fastball vert and get to that higher tilt, higher axis, more efficient spin. But what I would encourage you to do instead is address that more from the posture so that we can keep that arm in plane. So what I mean by posture is how forward or how upright your trunk and your pelvic posture is. The more upright your posture, as you actually go to rotate, if I'm in this more upright posture and I rotate, my trunk is now going to deliver my arm in that rotational plane and get to that higher tilt. So think about any high slot pitcher who throws hard, they're already in that extremely upright posture so that as they rotate, that trunk delivers the arm in plane, as opposed to the trunk not actually matching that plane and the arm artificially climbing. This also creates issues when it comes to shoulder impingement, when it comes to tricep discomfort. It puts more demand on the bicep to decelerate the arm. There's all sorts of issues that happen when that elbow begins to climb to cheat vert, as opposed to using that upright posture to actually deliver the arm in plane with the shoulders. So how exactly does remote coaching work? You will have unlimited access to text and email your coach, hop on weekly FaceTime calls, and receive regular mechanical and training updates. Each day, your plan will detail exactly what to do from start to finish, with instructional videos for every single throwing drill, mobility routine, and lifting exercise. Nobody's going to do the work for you, but we can show you the path to get there. It's your career. Let's get to work. The next way to increase your fastball vert has to do with your direction and rotating down into landing versus getting overly rotational. There's a couple of different planes that are working in tandem when it comes to the pitching delivery. The one that we want to avoid getting excessively into is the transverse plane. When you get overly rotational and you spin off, the fingers end up more on the side of the baseball, which again might not be an issue if you're trying to create arm side run, you're trying to create sink. But if you're trying to get more on the back of the baseball and on top of the baseball, then it can be helpful to improve the actual linear direction of your delivery and think about rotating down into landing so that your arm can actually be delivered down and through the baseball. This is something that doesn't necessarily have to correspond to a massive change in arm slot. For example, in my own delivery, as a lower slot lefty, when I don't try to come down through the ball, I'll end up in something like this slot, but my fingers end up more on the side of the baseball. When I think about actively carrying down through the ball and rotating down into landing with direction, I'll still end up in a relatively similar slot, but my fingers will find their way a little bit more on top of the ball. And what I find is that I end up minimizing the arm side misses, and it just lends itself to a higher carrying fastball by keeping my lane, keeping my direction, and thinking about rotating down into landing as opposed to out and around into landing. That'll influence how the fingers actually come through the back of the baseball. The next option has to do with the glove side, and the glove side can be a powerful cue for certain guys. It can also screw up certain guys, so be careful with this cue, but it is something that we've seen to be correlated to increased fastball vert. What you can think about is, as you're breaking your hands, you can think about elevating your glove side just a little bit. It's actually going to encourage your arm to come through in a slightly higher slot. The risk here is that if you really cheat that position, what might happen is you end up climbing. And so you just want to be careful and make sure that as you elevate the glove side, if you over exaggerate it too much, that arm doesn't climb way above the plane of your shoulders, and it doesn't end up being a cheating pushing arm path. But again, that can be a very quick hack that you give somebody. Elevate the glove side a little bit. They're probably going to gain 1, 2, 3 inches of vertical break very quickly, but you just have to make sure when you look at the trade-offs that that's not leading to the arm climbing and cheating out of plane. The next tip is to stop cutting the ball. And so what I mean by that is that if you're naturally in a little bit more supination, so you're naturally a supinator, you naturally have a little bit of cut on your four-seam fastball, you have no problem throwing a cutter, no problem throwing a slider, no problem throwing a sweeper, you end up in a little bit of that supinated position. If you're able to get a little bit higher spin efficiency to where you're actually more behind the ball, you reduce some of that gyro spin where you have a more true, close to 100% spin efficiency that will typically correspond to an increase in fastball vert as well. There are a ton of reasons that can lead to an inefficient fastball. This can be a late arm. This can be issues when it comes to mobility. This can be naturally you're a little bit more middle finger dominant instead of index finger dominant. Whatever the reason, this might take a little bit of digging to figure out why you have more of a cut fastball, a more inefficient spin, and how are we going to get you back to the fingers being behind the baseball and a more efficient spin. Again, it goes back to the disclaimer at the start of the video. Not everybody needs to be chasing maximum fastball vert. You might find that just switching to a sinker grip allows you to create some demon sinker type shapes, but increasing your spin efficiency will certainly lend itself to a little bit better fastball vert. The next thing that we've seen lend itself to higher fastball vert is actually outdoor long toss and outdoor pull downs. And specifically, I'm saying outdoor long toss, outdoor pull downs because you're able to see that immediate ball flight. So you're able to see how far that ball travels out of your hand on an arc, and on the way in, how far that ball actually travels and carries and resists gravity on pull downs. If you're just long tossing indoors into a net, you can't actually see any ball flight. If you're just doing pull downs into a net, you can't see any ball flight, and so you don't get that immediate feedback. And that's really the secret when it comes to long toss and pull downs, is if you're long tossing out of a four-seam fastball grip, the throws that have higher spin efficiency, the throws where your fingers get on top of the ball, behind the ball, and you have a slightly higher axis, those are gonna be the throws in general that carry further. And so you'll get this immediate feedback that the throws that carry further, oh, that was a successful rep, I'm gonna try to do that again. Again, this is where long toss pull downs might not be as appropriate for somebody who's a lower slot or a sinker guy who isn't necessarily trying to create that shape. They're trying to create more sink and more run, not necessarily more lift and more carry. And so when it comes to long toss and pull downs, just a great way to have that immediate feedback in terms of what you're doing. So it's just a really easy way without technology to see what type of spin, what type of axis, what type of efficiency you're creating just outside of catch play. And then one final bonus option, if all else fails and you're a strong pronator, is to take a sinker grip, offset it, and throw a reverse seam shift sinker, which instead of actually creating extra depth and arm side, we're going to create a seam effect in the opposite direction, creating lift and actually a little bit of cut. However, that probably won't work unless your name is Josh Hader.